The OG seed investor, Mike Maples Jr. of Floodgate. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Here's the thing. Great founders move people to a different future. It's their job description. When I'm talking to an entrepreneur, that's part of the test, is I'm like, is this person gonna treat entrepreneurship like it's some career move where they have to be treated fairly? Or are they gonna say, hey, life isn't fair, get used to it, I wanna change the future, I'm changing it, let's go.
You also talk about how these great founders, they're great storytellers.
Stories have existed before the written word. And what a good story does is it bypasses your rational mind. It gets to your emotional, subconscious mind.
Is luck a thing? Like just luck as a concept?
What I've come to realize is that luck visits all of us. And most of us don't answer it because most of us aren't awake to the possibility of the luck.
What have you learned about relationships from the entire venture journey over the last almost 20 years now?
This is a business where the calls you make matter a lot more than the calls you take. And if you're not willing to do that, you need to retire. And I don't look at risk as the probability of failure. I look at it as the expected value of the upside.
Mike Maples Jr. of Floodgate, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
You are the OG seed investor, started seed investing, before the term even existed. Like you created the category, as our friend Christopher Lockett would say. And you've been on the Midas list 8 times. You're one of the earliest investors in Lyft, Twitter, now X, Chegg, and multiple other Twitch, multiple other once in a generation sort of companies, right? And we met about 3 years ago, I guess, and at that time, something that was really bothering me was technological stagnation. Still is. And we did this dinner, if you might remember, to have that conversation, and you were a big supporter of Blake Scholl and Boom Supersonic. You had him on the pod, and that's where I discovered him. I was like, oh man, these are the inventors of our time. You don't need an aeronautical engineering degree. You don't need to go to school. You don't need accreditation. You can just go do it. And he is like the embodiment of it.
Yep.
Right. And since then, you've played your part. You funded Hadrian, which is now, and the founder Chris Power, is also the co-founder of Reindustrialize, which is
Stud. Yeah,
this a really big movement now across America. And Hadrian is bringing automation to manufacturing. They recently raised a $300 million round or something like that, I think, right? So are you 100x on that, by the way?
No, not quite.
Not quite.
Nope,
not quite there yet. And Founders Fund invested, and all the top tier VCs came in. So do you think, like, looking back 3 years, are we further along on that trajectory to the Jetsons' future, or how do you see where in time are we?
I think in some ways we're further along. Not as far as I'd like to be. So I think something happened in the early 70s. So have you ever seen this site? I think it's called WTF happened in 1972.com or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are a lot of theories about when did we start to have stagnation and what caused it. And a lot of people kind of point to about slightly more than 50 years ago. So like if I'm channeling my inner Peter Thiel, he would probably say something like, we landed on the moon, and then a couple weeks later, the hippies took over Woodstock, and it's never been the same ever since. So that's one interpretation. The other interpretation would be Nixon took us off the gold standard, right? And so once currency got detached from sound money, one argument goes that caused a financialization of the economy. So, you start making more money by being a private equity firm or by IBM's borrowing over $100 billion to buy back their own stock, right? Yep. So that doesn't create any jobs. It doesn't advance the standard of living. There's another, though, interpretation that I think might be the most accurate, which is the rampant rise of safetyism. And so, you got embedded in the culture sort of this risk aversion. Like I remember as a little kid zipping around on a big wheel. You'd come home from school and play in the neighborhood with your friends and show up at home for dinner. Yeah. And your parents just assume you're doing great if that happens. And we had lawn darts and like all this stuff, and like it was just the tolerance for risk and the tolerance for unsafe things was a lot higher. And I think when you start to develop rampant safetyism, which kind of culminated in recent years in helicopter parenting and, everybody gets a trophy with millennials and stuff. I think that you start to lose the ethos of risk-taking, and you start to lose the ethos. You worry more about what can go wrong rather than focus on what can go right. And so, safetyism basically permeated all the aspects of society and the economy except for the world of bits. And so, the frontier became no longer the world of atoms and the world of the real physical world. It became the online world. That was the only place you were allowed to innovate without somebody stopping you.
We were just going over an interesting tweet that we'll just like comment on the timeline that, you go pitch to VCs, a manufacturing company. I'm asking because you've invested in one, right?
Yeah.
And the answer from Silicon Valley is 5 minutes into the Zoom that this is too capital intensive. And might be a good play for private equity. So you go to private equity and they're like, oh no, this needs to be de-risked and, maybe go back to VCs. But on the other side, when we're in the crypto boom, you have $50 million pre-seed rounds for, these different ideas. We're in the AI boom now, you're having these $50 million pre-seed rounds for these different SaaS companies, right? So I think his question is like, are you going to advance the frontier, like if this keeps up? So any comments or thoughts on that?
Yeah, without being too extreme, I guess I just kind of reject that whole line of thinking. So here's the problem I have with that kind of line of thinking is a great founder is not going to struggle to raise money. Like Elon Musk would never have that conversation. That conversation that we had just right now, you would never see Elon Musk say, oh gee, when I go to VCs, they say I should talk to private equity guys. When I talk to private equity guys, they say I should go back to VCs. Woe is me, innovation's hard. I can't raise money. Like Elon Musk is just an extremely high agency person who wills that sucker into existence. And he's going to raise the money, and he's going to do it even if he doesn't know how he's going to raise the money yet.
Right.
And so I don't think we have a shortage of capital for the great ideas. I think that you could argue that we don't have as many entrepreneurs as I wish we had to pursue some of the ideas. But
I agree with that.
Yeah. So I'd much rather have more Elon Musks than more smarter VCs. Because I'm not saying VCs are the smartest guys in the world, but there's a lot of them who have money. And for me, the rate limiting factor is truly great founders, who combine art and science and can both invent something and also persuade the rest of us to move with them.
So I agree. I don't think there are enough founders that are going after enough of those, rare combination of the great scientists and the great artists that are going after these problems. But then there's another argument in the comments, which is, well, Elon had the PayPal exit and $100 million to fund that, fund his thesis. I think you talk about this, you have this contrarian thesis for the world that you have to go test out, right? And he had that.
Yeah.
And after that, things became easier. So what do we say to that?
I mean, I guess I just don't. I think that anybody who's been exposed to these founders would know that whole line of discussion is just wrong-headed, right? So like, here's the thing. Great founders move people to a different future. It's their job. It's their job description.
Right.
And so like great founders look at the world that we're in where, I don't know, last time I checked, it's like $50 billion of VC a year, just some crazy amount of money. We have the most mature, robust capital markets for startups anywhere in the world by far. Any great founder who's high agency is unconcerned with whether VCs are visionary or not, or whether enough of them are smart or not, or whether somebody started with a head start or not. It's just like the very best founders, that doesn't even compute in their world. Like those thoughts don't exist in their mind because they have a future that they want to manifest. And they're going to make it happen, and they're going to convince you that it's going to happen, and they're going to move all the people they need to move to that necessary different future. And so, like, to me, when I'm talking to an entrepreneur, that's part of the test, is I'm like, is this person going to treat entrepreneurship like it's some career move where they have to be treated fairly? Or are they going to say, hey, life isn't fair, get used to it, I want to change the future, I'm changing it, let's go. Are you with me or not with me? And so, yeah, I'm not all that sympathetic to arguments that say entrepreneurship is screwed up, or it's like there's not enough opportunities, or there's not enough this and that. Maybe that's true, but like the folks that I work with or want to work with, they don't care about any of that stuff.
To that, I think you also talk about how these great founders, because of what's needed to convince, the people they need to, they're great creators of movements.
Yeah.
They're great storytellers.
Yes.
So say more on that.
Yeah. So the only reason for a startup to exist is to change the subject, right? Like a normal business, they try to create competitive moats, and they try to compound their advantages, and they try to, do the things that work more often better. But a startup, if that's what it takes to succeed, the startup's going to fail, because why would you buy from a startup? Your customer, why would you buy from a startup if you had any reasonable alternative? You wouldn't. So the only reason you're going to buy from a startup is if you're desperate for what that startup has and there's nobody else who has it.
Yep.
And so like a great startup forces a choice, and they avoid the comparison game. And so the startup has to do a couple things. One is it has to show up out of nowhere with something totally radically different. But if you're in that different future by yourself and you just stay there, you're not going to have a startup for very long, right? You're just going to be out by yourself, right? Yeah. And so you've got to convince people to move to that different future with you. And that's why you have to be a great storyteller, because stories are about transformation. And so you've got to convince people that they're going to transform their own life's journey by following your different future, that they're going to be sort of actualized in a different way than they expected. And so that's why you have to be a good storyteller. You can't just be right about the future. You have to convince people that you're right, and you have to move them off of the path that they're on. Because if this is the present, founder sitting out here, I've got to move somebody from this path up to this path. And move is a verb, right? So all movements involve moving people, starting one at a time and then accelerating over time.
What's a recent example of this movement that a founder created, or a great storyteller that you met recently? And
there have been so many. I'd say that one who's been very effective is Qasar Younis at Applied Intuition. And so Qasar had a vision around vehicle intelligence, and that, in the future you're going to have software-defined cars, but not just cars, but drones and bulldozers and, kind of anything that moves. And so he started out with simulation software, but then he moved into doing the whole stack. And, it takes a lot of gumption to convince the CEO of a car company to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on your software, right? That's a career decision. Yeah. And so you got to be a pretty darn good storyteller to pull that off, right? You can't just say, here's my software for what it is, right? You have to help the CEO of that company understand the different future that's going to be manifest for their car company if they follow in the direction of vehicle intelligence. Another guy who's done a really good job recently is Omar Haroon, who has a company called Younis that was just funded not long ago, also by General Catalyst. And he's trying to sell to the chief legal officer of Fortune 500 companies and, trying to sort of create the AI-enabled law firm. So rather than paying folks by the hour for the same task over and over, right, you could use AI and help
Is it the new paralegal?
Well, I don't know about that. I think it's more of like, okay, where are there parts of our legal spend where we're getting overcharged? And so if you sell to the law firms, you can help them automate how they practice legal. But the problem is there's a context with law firms, which is they charge by the hour.
Yeah.
And so they're always going to have a business that's predicated on charging by the hour. And so what I like is kind of this idea of, why does there have to be so many billable hours? And like, especially if you're a big company, why do you want to spend so much money on billable hours on external providers? And Omar's done a very effective job of telling that story and getting us involved in some pretty gigantic situations.
What stood out about that story? And you also talk about how the story is different for investors, it's different for customers, it's different for employees.
Yeah, so people, I think when I talk about storytelling, I'm actually pretty precise about what I mean. So, like, to me, storytelling is a lot more than just good messaging, for example. So stories have existed before the written word. And so we had to have a way to help people transmit ideas throughout generations, how to work with fire, how to draw on caves and all this stuff. And storytelling was the mechanism that we used. And what a good story does is it bypasses your rational mind and gets to your emotional sort of subconscious mind. A good story can cause your blood pressure to change or your heart rate to change, or you can sweat or things like that, because it activates, you know, your autonomic nervous system, right? Yeah. And so what is a story? Probably the best description I've heard is Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. So maybe we use an example, Star Wars. So you have the hero, Luke Skywalker. He's in the ordinary world, Tatooine. He's bored out of his mind. And then all of a sudden a mentor shows up. In this case, it's Obi-Wan. And he engages the hero in a call to adventure. And, let's go rescue Princess Leia. And then the hero resists the call. Something really bad happens. Hey, I've got to do chores for Aunt Brew and Uncle Owen this summer. I can't go with you, Obi-Wan, sorry. But then the stormtroopers burn up their farm. And he says, all right, that's enough. I got nothing left here. Let's go time. Let's go rescue the princess. You find co-conspirators, you know, Han Solo, Chewie, the R2 and C-3PO. Yep. You rescue the princess. You cross the threshold. You beat the Empire by blowing up the Death Star. Yep. And then you emerge transformed. They even get medals at the end, right? Well, it turns out that story primitives throughout all of history follow that step pattern. You know, I could do the same thing that I just did, but for the Wizard of Oz. And so you have the ordinary world, the world that is, and you have the world that could be. And what you're trying to do is create a tension between the world that is and the world that could be. And you're trying to recognize who the hero is, which is the customer or the first startup employee or investors. Right. And then you as the startup founder, you're not Luke, you're Obi-Wan, you're the mentor. Right. But like there's a lot of parallels. So like if you look at Lyft, right, which is a company we were involved with, the ordinary world was the crappy taxi situation in San Francisco. You can't get around, parking's a pain in the ass. You know, people break into your cars, it's expensive, screwed up. Remarkably. Yeah, it's screwed up, right? And, you know, if you get a cab at all, it comes late, you can't rely on it to get somewhere. If it takes credit cards, one of those janky triplicate swiper reader thingies. You know, which cab usually smells bad and the guy's gross and all this stuff. So Lyft kind of says, all right, well, what if you could just have an app and you could request a ride? But this is where the genius of the pink mustache came in, right? It's scary to get in a stranger's car. Yeah. But like if you see these cars zipping around San Francisco with big pink mustaches on them, people in a sidewalk cafe in San Francisco say, hey, what's up with that? What's up with that pink mustache? So it causes people to be more likely to accept the call to adventure. And as the founder, we have to honor the fact that early believers, they have to believe that there's a credible chance that they're going to succeed. Yeah. And so you're asking them to do something they haven't done, and you're asking them to stick their neck out when they don't have a reason to, really. Because, you know, as bad as taxis were, yesterday they worked, sort of, right? And so the other thing, though, about storytelling that is a remarkable parallel, so like if you go back to Star Wars, you have Obi-Wan, and he says there's this thing called the Force. Yeah. And it's this magic. And, you know, if you use the Force, you can beat the Empire, you can do all kinds of stuff. And then there's this tool, it's called the lightsaber, you know, where it's the tool of the Jedi. Yeah. It turns out that the same is true for startups. So the insight is the magic. So like in the case of Lyft, the insight was, you know, you can request a ride peer-to-peer rather than take a taxi. And then the app itself was like the lightsaber, right? Yeah. But why is that important? Well, when you're a founder and you're talking to an early customer, they have to believe that they have a credible chance of succeeding, right? Yeah. Like your startup's 80% likely to go out of business. You're asking them to go on this crazy journey. Mm-hmm. And so you want to be able to say not just what the product is for what it is, but you want to be able to express the magic behind it, because the person needs to have a credible belief that they're going to succeed if they take this crazy risk with you. Yeah. And so a lot of startup storytelling is about applying the startup story arc but to the process of transforming early believers to join your movement. And so the world that is the world that they're in right now, and the world that could be is the different future that you're articulating. And so that's why it's so important in my view.
Do you think a lot of founders struggle with communicating or articulating that magic part, the insight part?
Yes. Well, part of the problem is a lot of startups just don't have an insight, right?
Yes.
So a lot of startups, they're just building a cool widget and they hope that that's going to succeed. Or they're building a better version of something, which I think usually doesn't work or usually doesn't result in something profound.
Yeah.
So some of the times they just don't really have a story, right? They don't have anything to say.
Yeah.
But I think the other issue is that storytelling is different from describing, right? It's one thing to say I need to describe my product well, but that's not what we're trying to do. We're not interested in that. We're interested in getting someone to do something different tomorrow than what they did yesterday.
Yeah.
And they have to take action now for that to happen. They have to act they have to change how they think, feel, and act.
Can you break that down? Is it because you operated at the earliest stage, right? You're seeding these companies.
Yeah.
So does that mean you're not attached to the product, but to the insight you have, and then you're truth seeking towards what is that product that addresses this?
So I think that the product is like a reference implementation of the insight. And that's why I think that we've been good at investing in pivots. So if the insight isn't true, I just don't think you have a startup.
Yeah.
It's kind of like if the force isn't real, like Luke isn't going to blow up the Death Star because he can't turn the computer off and hit the thing, right?
It's game over. You're done.
It's game over. You're done. And but there's a set of things though that I've learned. We haven't really talked about this. You might like this. I'll try this on. This is the first time on your podcast. So what I realize is that breakthroughs have a mechanism, and it's true not just in startups but in science and in art. And it starts with what I call the refusal. So like if you think about it, in order to do something radically different, you have to refuse something in the present. You have to be willing to contrast yourself from the conventional wisdom. So what did Stripe refuse? Stripe says, hey, look, everybody assumes that you've got to get a merchant account according to the laws of banking, and you've got to go through all this compliance steps and jump through these hoops. What did Figma refuse? They refused this idea that design happens in files and then you throw it over the wall to developers. And the refusal has to be complemented with a heresy. So if all I do is say this sucks, I'm not solving anything. I'm just being a cynic, right? Yeah. And so what was the heresy for Stripe? It was, here's 7 lines of Ruby code, now you're taking payments. Or with Figma, it's like, here's a canvas, 5 cursors show up in it at once. And so the heresy usually demonstrates in the product something where if someone's inclined to believe what you believe, they can't unsee it. They're like, I'm never doing design the way I used to. I'm never going to take payments that way. You know, it's a new world now. So, and then the third thing that I look for is what I call the emotional shift. And this is where, you know, there's the logic of a reframe, but there's also the emotion of the reframe. And an emotion has the word motion in it, right? And so you're trying to get people to move. And so part of how you move people is at the individual one-by-one level. You shift their emotions. You say, hey, taxis sucked and I hated it, but now I get in the car and I fist bump the driver and it's fun and it's cool, right? Or like now design is multiplayer and collaborative, and that's how things should be in the cloud, you know? And so you get this visceral, tangible, emotional shift in the person, but then you want to change not just how people think and feel, you want to change how people act in massive numbers of people, and that's where the movements come in. So I like to say there is the refusal, and the refusal rejects conventional wisdom that's hidden in plain sight, that everybody says that's just the way it's done. So like, it's funny, the most dangerous laws in business aren't really laws. They're conventional beliefs that we all have, right? That just go unsaid, that we just assume are true. Taxis suck in San Francisco, right? And then the heresy is translating your insight into a product experience where it's like, that's what you mean by that magic you just described. Like, and like you can't unsee it. You can't imagine another way. It makes the old way look ridiculous. It makes it look absurd.
Yeah.
And then the emotional shift is the feelings of empowerment that you get as an individual by making that shift to that better, different world. And then the movement is you and other people start to form a tribe of like-minded folks who kind of move to that different future. And then eventually the movement accumulates and it goes from being counterculture, contra conventional wisdom to, oh, of course, that's the way it's been done.
10 years later.
10 years later, right? So now everybody looks at Figma and they say, okay, of course design happens in teams. That was obvious.
Yeah. How else would you do it?
Yeah, that was
you know,
obvious.
kids who are starting out today from college, they're like, what else do you use?
Yeah, and then there's probably somebody out there saying, yeah, but what if you weren't Dylan Field and you weren't a Teal Fellow? How are you going to do Figma then? I'm like, okay, you know, screw those people.
Well, Founders Fund didn't invest them until Series C, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think that is the best articulation of what storytelling looks like that I've heard, where your job is to look for when you're sparking emotion in people and when you're actually moving people. And you iterate your way to that, I guess, narrative.
Somewhat, but usually I find that the insights have kind of always been there.
Or the insight is compelling enough that, you know, it should, yeah.
Yeah, so like what a lot of people look for is like a recipe for breakthroughs or a recipe for coming up with these ideas. I find that that's not usually how it happens. What happens is someone is themselves frustrated with the way things are, but unlike other people, they say, why does it have to be that way? And they just keep pushing on it and pulling on the thread and pulling on the thread and pulling on the thread until one day they realize the whole premise unravels.
Yeah.
And so, like, I don't think Patrick Collison said, I'm going to be the payment czar of the world, right? I think he's just like, payments are a pain in the butt. Why is that? Why does it have to be this way? And he just kind of kept fiddling with it, and then he started to ask his friends about it. He just noticed it, you know. I think Brian Chesky was the same way with Airbnb. And so I think that a lot of the breakthroughs, and you know, by the way, this is why I think it's valuable to study science and art. So like, if you think about it, like the general theory of relativity, it had all four components. So Einstein refused something. He refused the idea that time is an immutable clock. And his heresy was that time is not immutable, but time is in a fabric of space-time, that the speed of light is immutable. And okay, what does that mean? That means that now you have a whole new mental model for thinking about how the universe works. So scientists got excited because they did a whole new set of experiments that had never been conceived of before. And now all of a sudden, they were having all these paradigm-shifting discoveries because now the frame of reference of how they conducted the experiments and their assumptions about how the universe worked changed. Now everybody says, hey, you know, Newton's explanation of physics was good to a certain point, but Einstein's is more complete. And so one way I like to think of an insight is it's a better story for how the world should work. And it's like, and that's true in science as well, right? Nobody ever says that Einstein's theory is the last word in all theories, right? Yeah. Somebody hopefully will come up with a better one. But science I find really useful in the sense that just like in science you run experiments and you're trying to falsify the idea to show that it's robust, the same is true when you talk to customers and when you're trying to validate your insight with product. But to me, the iterations of product are like the experiments that you do to navigate the insight to the desperate customer. But there's also the art side to it, right? Where you're persuading people, you're telling stories, you're moving people past their logic. So Picasso, right, with Cubism, Cubism refused the idea that art should look real. And, you know, it used to be that a real painting was judged to be a good painting if it had vanishing point perspective and all this stuff. Picasso says, no, I'm going to make stuff that looks cubist and like you can see it from different angles and you can see different versions of the person from the same angle. Art should be about how it makes you feel. Art is about the experience of the viewer, not about the realism of the drawing or the painting. And so, you know, he refused the conventional idea what art should be and then proposed this very heretical thing. You know, when people saw his early Cubist paintings, people thought he was high on something, right? Like he was crazy. But, you know, he ended up sort of being a culture bearer for where modern art went.
Which is what a lot of I guess founders sound like, at the early stage when when it's just an idea, and they're non-consensus and they're trying to create this countercultural movement, and which is why I guess seed investing is more art.
There is a fair amount to it.
Right? Because you have to experience it. You meet this person and they compel you, and it's an experience very similar to experiencing great art.
Maybe, or it might be it's more about having good taste in who the artists are, so like for example, Peggy Guggenheim knew a bunch of these famous artists and hung out with them and stuff like that, even though she didn't know how to paint. So, I do think that there is, part of my job is just knowing, does this person have the stuff?
So do you think there should be more patronage at the earliest stage, similar to what it was for artists? Maybe Thiel Fellowship was that.
Well, I guess I go back and forth on this. On one hand, I'd love to see as much entrepreneurship as possible and as many resources for everybody, and everybody can do what they want to do, right? I'm like, why wouldn't I? Yeah. On the other hand, I feel like greatness and exceptionalism is just truly rare, and that the power law is real, and that what people ought to be focused on is, what does it take to be great? What is different about the founders that are truly great, and how can I be more like that? Rather than what should change about the world to make me more successful. So, I think that these entrepreneurs who are great are extremely high agency, sovereign individuals who move the world, and that's what we should be learning about, I think.
So I think let me restructure that. When I say more patronage, I'm saying like for not to increase, entrepreneurship. It's like maybe if you've identified this rare individual who's high agency, you're giving them more it's more vehicles for them to have more shots on goal.
It's interesting. The thing that I would like to see more of actually is encouraging young people to do what's interesting for its own sake to them. Right?
Yes.
Right? And so I'm less worried about, is there enough money for startups?
Right.
I feel like there's too many people who want to just do a startup.
Yeah.
And not enough people who realize that a lot of the great startup ideas come from people who weren't pursuing a startup. They were pursuing something that they were interested in for its own sake that nobody else was pursuing. And in fact, most people would have thought it was a waste of time. And part of why they had an insight was they opened a fractal of knowledge that nobody had opened. Yep. And now all of a sudden, the company becomes the way that they can continue to explore the thing they're interested in.
I think that's what Jim O'Shaughnessy is doing with OSV, right? Is a lot of the grants are just, you want to pursue your interest? Here's $100K.
Yeah.
Or there's a whole tiers to that. It's first $10K, and then out of that pool there's like $100K or something like that.
Yeah, and my partner at Floodgate, Ann Miraco, one time did a few experiments where she would take people who wanted to be founders and give them some money, and they'd take 6 to 9 months and try to do their idea. But what was interesting is, as opposed to say like most accelerators where you have demo day, you try to raise money, the default premise is that the idea is false. And that it has to be so great that it overcomes the bias of being false. And what you realize pretty soon is some people realize they're just not really suited to be founders. They didn't know what they were getting themselves into. Other people are like, okay, I can't imagine doing anything else in this world. Yeah. It's just a matter of time. But like it's interesting. Like lots of people have romanticized ideas about what it would be to be a founder. Yeah. And they just have no context to understand what it would really be. Yeah. I mean, in some ways, I like to say, like when I was a founder, I used to say, I almost thought being a founder was a curse more than a blessing,
Why did you say that?
Because I loved doing it, and but the problem is you had to work like crazy. It didn't make any rational sense for me to be doing it, but I couldn't not do it. I was like called to it. Yeah. And so I was almost like it'd be easier if I could just have a normal job and just have a normal life and all that stuff. But like I'm kind of had a screw loose and had to do this, right? And so, but like a founder is not an easy job. It's not a fun job necessarily. It's kind of a shit job, right? It's like a job where, I think Sean Parker once said you have to get used to chewing on glass and liking the taste of your own blood, right? It's like hard, really hard. Right. And a lot of people just have no idea what they're getting themselves into when they do these.
I guess that's the one thing accessibility to entrepreneurship has done is like the lines have become blurry between the people who realize what it is and the people who don't. And maybe programs like the ones your partner did, right, are a good cost-effective filtering process.
Yeah, and it's like the one downside of it being so easy to start startups is that a lot of people start startups that aren't worthy of their time and talent. Yeah. And so this is one of the things that I really admire about Elon. So people say, what makes Elon different? And here's what I think that is underappreciated about him. When you think about it, he only goes after ideas where failure's not an option in his mind. So like Elon doesn't say, I'm doing SpaceX, I'm going to hope for the best. And if it works, easy come, easy go, right? Tesla, electric cars are hard. Yeah. Hey, if I fail, nobody else has succeeded either, whatever. Right? Like Elon picks ideas where he feels like it existentially challenges him as a human being on this earth to succeed at it. And so like the advantage to that is, I think that I heard Peter Thiel once say if they wrote a book on PayPal, the chapter on Elon was going to be called "The Man Who Knew No Risk." Yeah. And so like it's interesting, right? Because there are certain opportunities where if you're that committed to them succeeding, where if failure is not an option and you just cannot conceive of a world where you fail, now all of a sudden it's hard for you to fail because you just never back down. So you think about it, he just never backs down, ever. And so that only works, though, if you're pursuing ideas that are so important to you to succeed at that you never would back down. If it feels existential, if it feels like life and death, you don't care what the odds are. If it's like live or die, you don't say, tell me what the odds are, right? Like you're just like, okay, failure's not an option because I don't want to die. Right. So he picks ideas where failure is just inconceivable. It's so important to him that failure is inconceivable. So this is what some of the politicians don't understand. They don't understand that like the president that is more likely to help him get to Mars in his lifetime, he's going to go all in on that president. Right. He just will. Yeah. And it's like, it's like he's not going to care about any other stuff. Yeah. But other than that, right? Yeah. And so he has an extraordinarily high sense of willpower. Right. He is very willful. Yeah. And so now contrast that to a lot of ideas that people pursue. It's just not like that. They're like, what are first startups for? It's like, you win some, you lose some. And so one of the things that I like to say to founders is, you don't want to think of this startup as like a roll of the dice or just kind of some random experiment. You want to think of it as something that could be your life's work if it works. And you might start by just pulling on a thread the way Patrick Collison did, but in his case he wasn't saying it's time for me to start a startup. What can I start? It was more like, boy, payments seem like a hassle. I'm going to pursue that some. And just as he pursued it more and more, he realized that it was an opportunity and he escalated his commitment as he increased his certainty.
And also boom supersonic, right? Bring back supersonic flight. It's been gone for 20 years. Why? Why aren't we doing it? Yeah. And then, it was hard, right? Like, I think he's talked about it publicly. It was like, I think the company is almost has a near-death experience every year or something.
Oh yeah, and poor Blake, he's constantly fundraising. Yeah. He's at the mercy of the capital markets. Yeah. And he's probably been diluted way more than he deserves to be, given what he's accomplished. But I've never once heard him complain about any of it.
Yeah, he's an extreme optimist.
All he cares about is making supersonic flight real. Yeah. Right? And it's like, a lot of the founders, pretty much all the founders I've worked with who've had success have that aspect to them where it's like, in their mind, the future's already happened. And it's just like they're just catching the rest of us up with them.
Yeah. They're just reverse engineering for the rest of us.
Yeah. And so, Blake is like completely convinced that we're going to have supersonic air travel, right? Like it's not even a question in his mind. It's just a question of how soon can I do it and how easily can I do it.
Yeah, these were great examples, by the way. And another, I think, great, like, the deeper extension of what a storyteller looks like. I want to go back to like the Qasar and Omar moment. What was about their stories that struck you? What moved you when you first heard that story?
So they were different. So Qasar had been the COO at Y Combinator, and we'd kept in touch over the years. Right. And lately, my strategy has been more to get to know founders before they have their ideas figured out. And so Qasar said, I want to do something in auto, and I think I could be a really good fit because I grew up in Detroit, and I went to General Motors Institute, and I worked at GM. And now here I am at Google, and I worked on the Maps team, and I know a bunch of guys at Waymo, and I could recruit a bunch of really good people. And I think that the ability to speak in Detroit language and Silicon Valley language would be valuable. And Qasar just, I don't know if you've ever met him or seen him.
So I hosted him for an event.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah. I'll get to that, yeah.
Yeah, and so he definitely has a persona, you know, like, when you talk to Qasar, you're like, this guy isn't playing house, right? Like he is a serious, legit killer of a dude.
Very strong-willed.
Very strong-willed, right? And very, very able to, he has a following, you know? And so I was like, man, I'd really like to work with this guy. And so we went back and forth for about 14 months, just talking about different ideas. And he said, I don't want to have hardware. I don't want it to be anything other than software margins. I want to be able to have it be combination Silicon Valley skills and Detroit skills. You know, he had a set of conditions that if they weren't 100% met, he wasn't going to start it. So then one day he comes in with Peter as co-founder, and we're sitting in a conference room, and I invite some of the other Floodgate folks in, and I say, hey, look, can you guys give me a sanity check here? I've been spending all this time with Qasar, and he thinks he's locked onto something, not sure. Can you explain it, Qasar, what you're thinking about? And he describes the idea. And so when the meeting's over, Iris, who's kind of our probably more skeptical than most, right, on our team, says to me, Maples, why haven't you given this guy a term sheet, right? Like as soon as he pitches anybody, it's going to be crazy. It's going to be just a food fight to get into this round. And so I was like, really? You think so? She's like, dude, what are you doing? Like, we need to get this thing done.
Yeah, like and yesterday.
So I pretty much knew that I wanted to work with him. But, that was after 14 months of back and forth and trying different assumptions and seeing how he was going through the idea maze and stuff like that. Omar was different. So Omar, we had funded his prior company, TextIQ, and it was acquired for 150-ish million. Every now and then you'll get a founder who says, 150 million, that's kind of cool, but this is the real one. This is like, I learned some things. This is the one I'm going to go unbelievably all in. So this was another one where, 9 months back and forth talking about different ideas. And he, one idea that he pursued for a while had to do with private equity and, would just try to help how we could. But eventually, that one was interesting because he wanted me to do a little bit more than a typical investor would do. So his business was very predicated on getting lighthouse customers, and I'd had a lot of experience in that realm, and so he wanted me to get very involved with how they did their lighthouse customer program.
That is super interesting. So in both cases, there was an idea maze where you were involved and you saw them build that insight over time.
Yeah. Right.
And which was very interesting. So it goes back to our point where I think we were talking about that insights get developed over months or years.
I think so. And like, I want to be real careful here. Like, I'm not claiming that I helped them figure the idea out or any of that stuff, right? It's more that...
you had the shotgun view to it.
Yeah, and I mean, if I'm charitable to myself in this, it's that it wasn't like, hey, pitch me, bro, and I'll decide whether to fund you or not, right? And so I was kind of like, hey, look, don't even think of me as somebody to pitch. Like, just like, I think that you have greatness inside you, and I think that it's inevitable that you're going to come up with something great. So like, let's just spend time to get to know each other. And if it works out, it works out.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I like to see it. Because, I should probably back up for a second. I like to say to founders, right, be different, not better. Refuse something in the present. And I realized that maybe I was an OG seed investor and maybe seed investing was innovative in 2005. But in 2015, there were 2,000 seed firms, and I was being a hypocrite. I was telling everybody to be different, not better, and then explaining why I was better than the other seed guys. And so I was like, okay, one way that I could be different is I could say, like Benioff used to say, no software. I'd say no pitches. And I was like, if I by the time I meet the founder, it's a pitch, I met him too late compared to how I really want to meet him. And what I really want to do is meet them before they figured things out. And by the time they have figured things out, I want to say, okay, look, there's no way you're going to get to know somebody else as well as you know me. So now you just have to decide whether we want to work together or not. And if you say no, that's okay. You're not going to hurt my feelings. Right. But like, I'm not going to be in some auction thing where you price me against the next guy, because the next guy you're going to get to know for all 2 hours if you're lucky. Right. And so, so I try to avoid being one guy on a tour of 20 familiar suspects that they pitch. Yeah.
That's a great way to, I guess, like to keep reimagining yourself and the firm, as the times change. So you're saying that 2015, this is how you changed things. You took the no pitches approach, build relationships before they even have the pitch conceived.
Yeah.
We're now in 2025, 10 years later. How are you reinventing the firm and yourself in this era?
Yeah, I think that the main thing is, I would say in the early days, guys like me and guys like Josh Koppelman were magnets in the sense that, anybody who was going to raise $1 million in Silicon Valley, there's 2 guys you call, right? So we saw all of them.
Right.
So you didn't have to do work to see the good ones. You just had to have good judgment about who was good. You can't assume that anymore, right? In a world of thousands of seed funds, it's kind of a random walk.
Yeah.
And so, I interview founders sometimes that we work with. How did you decide to work with us? How did you hear about us? How did you get the intro? And it terrifies me, right? Like, I'm just like, oh my God, that's your sources of info? Holy crap. And so what I started to realize is that rather than be a better magnet, that I needed to have a better radar. And, if there's 10 thunder lizards created a year, in theory, I get to have hundreds of meetings. Mm-hmm. And so if I got really good at finding those needles in the haystack, that could be another path to succeeding. Not everybody's gone down that. I would say, for example, like Josh and the first round guys are more about being a magnet in the sense that they're trying to create a giant sales funnel.
Yep.
And they have lots of events and programs.
Content,
and it works great for them, right? Yep. In fact, when I think about it, I'm like, it's axiomatic that we can't do what they do, right? Because like, if you can't do the same thing the other guy does and be different. And so, like, I like to say sometimes even being different worse is better sometimes than trying to be better at the same. So that's been our model, has been find the founders before they figured out their startup idea, figure out who the prime movers to be are, and try to have a better radar at finding those folks. And if you do that, you change your entire value delivery system, right? You tell your associates, don't find me the next hot deal that everybody's competing for, find the next great founder, and like, let's talk about what that looks like and how we calibrate that, and how do we know when we're being fooled.
And let's just build a relationship with them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a concentration strategy.
I think so. Yeah. And that can't, like, if you're A16Z, that can't work because your fund's too big.
Yeah.
But if your fund is like $150 million like ours, that can work really well. And so, our view is we don't have to be in all the good deals. It's just that when we get involved with something, it has to be really good. And, you don't have to be right that often to have really good results when your fund is tiny. And so, one applied intuition, right, feeds you for a long time.
Is it like a 200x now?
Ish, yeah. It's probably about that, yeah.
So, in this case, are you not like doing 100 meetings a year? Is it more like headhunting, the 10 people which is extremely hard in its own, which makes you unique in your own right? How do you
It
find
varies.
those 10?
You know, so like for example, I really like doing the YC stuff.
Right.
And not just for the economics of it, but I just like the people, right? I like Gary Tan. I liked Sam Altman when he was doing it. I liked Qasar when he was the COO. Justin Kahn, Michael Seib, like all those guys I just respect. Some of the new partners like Gustav and Diana Hu and all those people. So for me, it's just fun to meet those founders. And it's a good use of time because I can set aside 3 or 4 days in a week
Right.
and just, you know, see pitch after pitch after pitch.
Right.
And it's good not just for the investment point of view, but it gives me a sense of like, what do these people think is interesting? You know,
Right.
what do the YC partners think is interesting? Which is always a good sanity check on what do I think is interesting and like how are the entrepreneurs that pitch me comparing to the ones that I'm talking to?
Right.
So it's a good sanity check that way. Because, you know, if you meet with, say, 40 companies in a batch,
Right.
you're going to encounter greatness, right? Some of those founders will be great.
Right.
And they'll remind you of what greatness looks like, and it'll remind you of whether you're seeing it in your day job.
So that's one part. What's the other part?
The other part is, you know, we have a Future Founders program, and we have these different founder archetypes, future founder archetypes, and we look for them. And every week, it reminds me a little bit of like fraternity or sorority rush, right? There's this list of people, and it's like, okay, what do we think of these people? What's their background, and who should we spend time with? And then we meet with them, and then we say, okay, where do we put these? You know, is this solid citizen, but probably not a founder? Is this person prime mover, Qasar, Younis to be? Is it, you know, what do we think? And then depending on how you come down on that question, you decide how much of your time to devote to different folks.
Can you say more about the archetypes?
Not sure I want to give the whole thing away, but you know, some people it would be, you know, I call them like a keystone builder. So like a keystone builder would be the person at OpenAI who designed the model that gave them a 10x leap ahead. You know, it wasn't something incremental, but it was something transformational. The person at OpenAI who figured out deep research. You know, so it's somebody who works with the latest technology, solves problems, has good taste in who else is good, technically, but most importantly, delivers things that make a difference.
Has a proven track record.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other type would be more like the classic storyteller type. You know, the Brian Chesky's of the world, the Qasar Younis's of the world. You know, people who have a presence and an X factor to them.
Yeah.
Well, you just said a few minutes ago that you had a session with Qasar. I'm curious, like, what you saw.
He is incredibly charismatic. Well, the session that was fun was behind the scenes.
Yeah.
When we were spending time. But yeah, on stage, I think we did talk about the idea maze journey, and he said, yeah, some of the exact same things, which was it had to be the right co-founder. So that too, I think I'll add to your story. It had to be the right co-founder, someone he knew, trusted, and then it had to be the right idea. Otherwise, you know, it wasn't worth doing, and most people shouldn't do it. And he's incredibly direct.
Yes, very much so.
Yes, so I assume if you draw parallels to Elon, right? So I assume that goes a long way when you're trying to do something extremely hard.
Yeah, and I think Elon's a little bit tougher on people in capricious ways than maybe Qasar is. But like what I find about Qasar is he reminds me of Coach Bill Walsh of the 49ers. So Bill Walsh wrote a book called The Score Takes Care of Itself. And a lot of people don't know this about him, but when he showed up in San Francisco, he would tell people, don't put your helmet upside down
I
in the
recently
locker.
started reading the book. Great book.
It's a great book,
Yeah.
right? And so what Walsh understood that was, and when people would run the pass pattern, he'd want them to run it within 1 inch accuracy, you know, and if they didn't, even if they caught the ball, he's like, what are you doing? You ran the wrong pattern. And so there's a couple things that are powerful in what he did. First of all, it was a system. So like Joe Montana is a rhythmic passer. And so if Joe Montana goes 3 steps back, he needs to know you're running the exact pattern because he's going to put the ball at the exact place you need to be. And he's knowing at the 3rd step, he's about to throw the ball. and you're not there yet, right? And so like you got to be there when the ball gets there. And so like the system doesn't work if you're not precise in the route you run and he's not precise in the rhythm of the patterns of the throws. But the other thing is that is maybe even more profound is little details matter because people tend to be high in their expectations all the time or not. And so like what Walsh understood is you want to put your helmet right side up in the locker because we're the 49ers, we're hot shit, we're the best, we do things right around here. Whether it's running a pass pattern or our lockers or whatever. But you walk into applied intuition, there might be like an X under the spot where the conference room chairs go. And like if there's like a hole in the middle of the table like some have where the cords come out of, after the meeting, if you don't put the cord back in, he's putting the cords back in and getting everything straight. Like you don't leave a conference room messy and thinking somebody else is gonna clean it up. Like it's just, you walk in, you take your shoes off and you've got like kind of these clog sandal things, right, to walk around in. But he's like, and people could say, well, what does that have to do with writing good software? And in some ways it doesn't, but what it does is it sets a tone, right? It sets a tone that says, when you're in this building, you do things right. And that's just how things are done around here.
It's culture, yeah.
It's culture, right? And it's like, it sends a message. Those small things add up to a lot of big things, right? In terms of how you do things.
And then that also is a direction for what's acceptable in this company. Right. And then it just becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy for every younger generation of talent that comes through.
Yeah. So the thing that he does well, and that guys like Frank Slootman do well at Snowflake and stuff like that, is like they realize that like mediocrity is the natural entropic state.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you're not constantly verifying that you're succeeding and that you're being world class and that you're raising the bar, it naturally starts to lower. Right? The entropic state is for the execution bar to lower through time. Yeah. And so it's the CEO's job to constantly raise the execution bar, to push, and not just be your friend, but like to push you to be better and to realize that if that person doesn't do it, there's no backstop.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate that about him. I think he's done a great job. And they've written software. You get reviews every month at Applied Intuition, right? So you're never like confused about where you stand, in the organization. It's not some mystery.
We did talk about talent and hiring, and I think one of his past colleagues was at the event who regarded it as one of the best career acceleration journeys that she's been on. So there's something about the culture. I think this is probably going to be the next maybe PayPal mafia or Airbnb mafia.
Maybe, and we'll see. I don't know how many startup people will come out of it.
Because he's so good at retaining talent?
I think he's good at retaining talent, but he's also good at, some of the people that he recruits are great at doing their job.
Right.
Not necessarily want to be startup guys.
Right.
Else, right? And some people do, right? So I think it depends.
It really depends on the company structure. We've covered great ground here. I want to talk about, you talk about in your book Disagreeableness, and you have the Ev Williams story, where you tell him not to raise too much because you're going to spend everything in 18 months anyway. But he has a way of, taking your advice and not rejecting you in the moment, but also doing what he thinks anyway. Are there other such stories you've encountered in your journey?
Yeah, so why disagreeableness? So if you think about it, a startup is a provocative act. A startup is a disagreement, right? I just got done a few minutes ago saying it starts with a refusal, right? So like every great new idea that's a breakthrough starts with defiance. And so, and that's like Einstein with relativity was that way, defied Newton physics, right? So it's not just startups. So you've got to be willing to depart from the consensus. And so if you depart from the consensus, you're gonna, the status quo has the word status embedded in it. There are people who are invested in the status quo, maintaining the status quo, and they're not gonna like it when you come with this radical idea. And so you gotta decide, what do I care more about? The future that I want to manifest, or succeeding in the current status dominance hierarchy of the world. And in order to manifest your idea, you're going to have to be disagreeable. And so because you're going to have to depart from the conventional norms that other people accept as a given. So I just noticed over time that the founders that I'd worked with who'd had the most success were disagreeable, that they had a strand of that in their personality, their temperament.
Are they all good at are they good at communicating that disagreeableness, or is it just like comes in different shapes?
They're different ways. So some of them will be like, hey, Maples, I just think you're full of shit. I just disagree with what you said right now, and I just don't think, I don't think you're paying attention to my business well enough to know what you're talking about. So that might be one form. Ev wasn't that way. Ev was more takes in what you say, and he was very sort of easy to talk to, right? In the moment, you feel like he's listening, and then he'd turn around and do the opposite a lot of times. But I never had a problem with that, So like a lot of people say, I want a coachable CEO. I'm like, like there's maybe.
Yeah.
But what I really want is the thing that I appreciated about Ev was I knew that he saw where I was coming from. Like I don't care. I'm not attached to whether he takes my advice.
Right.
But I want him to see what my view of the truth is.
Right.
And if he can steel man my version of the truth, that's the best I can hope for.
Well, that's the best scientists should.
Yeah, and you know what? He's the talent.
Yeah.
He's the guy that I'm backing here to do this thing, not me.
Yeah.
I'm not in charge of Twitter.
And he's in the arena, so.
Yeah, and so you say, okay, he saw all the facts. He sees not just what I see, but a lot of other stuff I don't see.
Yeah.
And so, last time I checked, he's the talent. And so, like, that's kind of how I look at things.
Yeah.
Now, there are some people who just get bristly and prickly, and they just, it's not that they're disagreeable, they just don't like to be challenged. They're thin-skinned.
Right.
But that's not what I usually find is that the disagreeable founders I've had the most success with are not worried about wounding my little psyche when they disagree with me.
Yeah.
And I'm fine. So some people will say, like, how did you let them talk to you that way? I was like, I don't care. I don't give a shit. It's like, as long as we win,
it's a debate,
like,
right?
Whatever,
yeah.
right? And it's related to like what you said about truth seeking, because like what you start to realize is if you're a truth seeker, you should always be surprised by not knowing something, because otherwise you think you know everything.
Yeah.
And so if all you're trying to do is prove that you know everything, you're not really being truth seeking. I mean, unless you're just the smartest person in the known universe of all time. And so like what I find is a lot of the truth seekers are looking to be proven wrong in certain ways. And they know that every time they're wrong in a way that doesn't threaten them existentially makes them better and smarter. So, if the founder pushes back and they're really good, it causes me to say, maybe my sense of reality isn't right. Maybe I'm the one that needs to be grounded here.
I think you also, in that like idea maze phase, you talked about, what was it, the 20 VC podcast or maybe Lenny's, where you're looking for, you asked this question, what were they surprised by?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And say more about that. Is there an example you can share?
Yeah, so I learned it from Scott Cook. So Scott was the founder of Intuit, and Scott would have meetings, and he noticed that people would come in and say, I think we should do this product or that product or whatever. And so he would ask, okay, well, when you did this analysis for why we should do this, what surprised you? And he concluded that if they hadn't been surprised, that they weren't really seeking the truth, they just had an agenda. They just knew what they wanted, and they were just like, well, nothing surprised me because I'm just right. And so Scott's point of view, which I agree with, is if you're doing a breakthrough, if you're on the leading edge, if you're discovering the undiscovered, how could you possibly not ever be surprised? How can you possibly know everything about the unknown? You can't.
Yeah.
It's impossible, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. It's not logically coherent. And so what you want to understand when it comes to breakthroughs is, what was the new thing that you learned by virtue of exploring the unexplored, right? And so like if you're exploring the unexplored, you should always learn surprising things, always, because it's
Right.
unexplored,
Yeah.
right? And so for me, it was a great cheat code because I realized that like a lot of people, when they do experiments, they're trying to validate their hypothesis.
Yeah.
But like another way to think of an experiment is you want to construct it so that you maximize your learning, including validation as well as surprise. So for example, when Chegg decided to test what to price their textbooks, they wanted to get at least $35 for a $100 textbook to rent. They could have done a test and said, hey, will you pay $35? Instead, they did a test to figure out what someone would pay. And so they found that some people would pay $75, $80 to rent a textbook, which changed how they thought about pricing. And so that was a positive surprise. A lot of the great startups, you're exploring the unexplored and you get a positive surprise. And rather than fix the gaps in what you think is wrong with what you're doing, you're better off saying, wait a second here, why did that positive surprise happen? Hey, I'm Brian Chesky. Why is it that like when I put up a WordPress site, it says I can rent a room in my apartment? Why did so many people want to do that? What's up with that? Oh, out of hotels in San Francisco. How often does that happen? Why do people go to hotels in the first place? You know, it's like, it's kind of like, you know, the surprise leads you down this rabbit hole of discovery.
Where you have that insight, but you're not exactly sure about how big that problem is.
Right.
Right. Or so is the...
And most of the great ideas come from something more like that.
Is your fundamental insight, like the North Star, always the same? And how so how you get there, are there surprises about how you're getting there?
Yeah. So for example, if you're, the mistake I made with Airbnb, right? Well, a lot of mistakes as I passed, but like what I should have seen was that he had earned the secret. He had gone through a set of steps to earn the secret. And so like the insights rarely come like a flash of lightning.
Right.
You and I are just sitting here at a whiteboard. We say, oh, I've got an idea. Insights come through lived experience, right? It comes from getting your hands dirty.
Yeah.
And so like vision is a really unfortunate word.
Yeah.
Because it implies like you have better binoculars and you're looking out over some mountain somehow.
Yeah.
But like that's not really how it happens. It happens because you're encountering friction at the edge. And you're asking, why am I having to deal with this friction? And why hasn't somebody fixed it? And what would happen if somebody did? And that's when you end up pulling on the thread, right? And the whole thing unravels.
Yeah. I'm just thinking of founders I've met who've gone through that journey, and yeah.
Yeah, and so that's why it's really important to me when I talk to a founder. I don't just say, how does this insight line up on my insight framework? Because they could have read Pattern Breakers and just said, hey, I stress tested my insight. They can fool me.
Yeah.
It's harder to fool me, though, with the journey that you undertook to get there and the things that you learned and like what fits and starts along the way and what surprised you, and that's harder to fake.
Yeah, and you can probably fake the pitch deck because you read Pattern Breakers, but you know when you have to tell the story of how you got there, you just can't. Yeah,
it's harder to, right? And then it's also the demo reveals a lot, and so the demo, you know, the best startup ideas I've seen, the demo reveals the insight in a very visceral way. So like, you know, I gave the examples of Figma and Stripe. You know, Figma, it's like 5 cursors in a canvas, and Stripe, it's like 7 lines of code and you're doing payments. And so, you know, Twitter, right? What are you doing in 140 characters or less? You know, it's almost like the product itself tells the heresy better than any story could, because the product is implemented in such a way that it's disciplined around the insight, right? The product brings the insight to life in a very powerful way.
I wanted to ask about how you make decisions, because I think we were talking about decisions compound over time, and you know, intentionality behind decisions compounds over time. I'm just curious about your decision. What were the other options on the table when you were starting one of the first seed funds in Silicon Valley?
Yeah, so hard to say, because I was living in Austin, Texas. A company I was involved with as a founder had just gone public, and I decided I wanted to come back to California. I was reading all this stuff about Web 2.0, and so I just decided to fly up here every Sunday night and stay till Thursday because my kids were still in school in Austin. So I did that from like January until June of 2005. And I was hanging out with some VCs, and I was getting pitched by founders, and they were saying, you know, hey, do you have a few extra minutes? And they'd say, because what I'd really like to do is raise like $1 million and not $5 million. Because at the time, you know, all the Series A firms would write $5 million checks. And, you know, it's either raise it from angels, scare up 250 grand, or go straight to $5 million Series A. So I was like, I wonder what would happen if you wrote $500,000 checks. And so there's this saying that we had 500,000 is the new 5 million because of what we now know is like the LAMP stack and lean startups and stuff. We didn't quite have the language to describe it then, but you knew something was happening. You knew that people were starting these things for much less money than they ever had before. So it's funny, it didn't really feel like a decision. You know, it felt like this is a thing, I'm gonna make a few investments doing it. Oh, these investments are working, maybe I'll raise a fund. But I never thought, is this gonna work or not, or should I do this or not? It was just like, of course this makes sense. You know, like of course there's gonna be seed funds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what about you, if you go even further back, like how did you make your earliest career decisions? Was it just saying Silicon Graphics was like, I think that was the first job?
Yeah.
Is it let's say yes to the opportunity you have at the time or the role you're getting? Like how?
Yeah, so I was a pretty risk-averse founder. So my view was that I didn't know what I was doing when I got out of college. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to take progressively more important jobs at progressively smaller companies until it converges on me being a founder. So, you know, I started at Silicon Graphics as a product manager out of college. And Silicon Graphics at the time was a great place to be. You know, it was kind of the it company in Silicon Valley. Did that for a couple of years, went to business school. And then after business school, I went to this company called Tivoli Systems, and I was a director of product marketing. And then we were acquired by IBM. And after that, I helped start Motive. So I was on a founding team of 5 people, started Motive in 1997, and then we went public in 2004. But like my roommate in college was this guy named Joe Lemont, who now people talk about Alpha School.
Alpha School, yeah.
And so Joe was what I called a psycho entrepreneur. Joe didn't finish college, you know, was risk seeking, not risk averse. And that could work really well. It's worked well for him, right? He's one of Forbes 400 billionaires, right? Yeah. And so I think that you kind of have to decide like who you are and kind of how you want to show up in the world. Larry Ellison, psycho entrepreneur. Steve Jobs, psycho entrepreneur.
I like that.
You know, David Packard, risk-averse entrepreneur. Andy Grove, risk-averse. Bob Noyce, risk-averse. So I don't think there's a right answer. I just think that there's, you know, Joe, when he was in college, is the kind of guy who would walk across Highway 101 blindfolded, and he gets across the other side and says, that works, see? That was a good risk to take. And, you know, you say, well, like a bunch of guys are going to get hit doing that. Yeah. He's like, not me. And so, you know, he just had a different sensibility about risk than I've ever had.
Interesting.
And, you know, Elon, the quintessential psycho entrepreneur, right?
Right.
Like the psycho entrepreneur, you know, like in Star Wars and maybe The Empire Strikes Back, they're in this asteroid field and C-3PO says, the odds of an asteroid field are like 10 trillion to 1 or whatever. Yeah. And he says, don't tell me the odds. Yeah. That's how a psycho entrepreneur thinks.
That's a very good analogy. Do you think psycho entrepreneurs increase their area of like surface area of luck by like, you know, multiple folds compared to other entrepreneurs?
Most don't. Most get hit by the asteroid, right? But there are some people who can defy the odds. So, and by the way, like, and when I say psycho entrepreneur, it sounds a little bit pejorative, and in some ways, risk-averse entrepreneur sounds a little bit pejorative. But that's why I like the terms, right? They're like kind of self-effacing terms. And most people, when I describe entrepreneurship that way, they instantly self-sort into one kind.
Oh, are those the 2 other archetypes?
Well, I talk to people who think about being founders. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, let me describe 2 types for you. Which type do you think you are? If I'm like hanging out at Stanford Business School or Harvard Business School, I'm like, I already know what kind you are, right?
Right.
But so I just have fun with that analogy.
Yeah. So like, how would you describe luck in entrepreneurship, or like high agency people, just increasing their chances? Or is luck a thing? Like just luck as a concept?
Partly, but here's what I think people don't get. So there's this guy, Louis Pasteur, right, who had this saying, chance favors the prepared mind. And he was always accused of getting lucky. He had some of the great breakthrough discoveries in all science. What I've come to realize is that luck visits all of us. Luck is like around us, and it visits us, and it knocks on the side door. And most of us don't answer it because most of us aren't awake to the possibility of the luck. And so, like, the reason that chance favors the prepared mind is that some people are the type of people who are able to see luck when they notice it. And then a lot of people just think luck happens to you. But what they don't realize is that luck happens to all of us. It's just some of us aren't awake enough to look. So I do believe in luck. I do believe in serendipity. I actually think luck has like a feminine quality. And so I like to say that luck is a goddess. And if you don't respect her and that she exists, she'll go give it to somebody else. And so it's like in ancient Greek philosophy or stories, they would talk about being visited by the muse. And so I think we're often visited by the muse, but we're trying to get through the day and we're getting through our list of things, and we don't realize we've just been visited by the muse. And the muse speaks in a quiet voice. And so we have to be listening to her at volume 11. And so I think some people are just better at it than others. And they seem lucky, and they probably feel lucky, but I think that they're more likely to attract luck.
They keep their eyes open for the side door.
Yes.
But more than others.
More than others. I realized this when I was reading this book called How to Think Like Leonardo da Vinci. And I realized that, like most people, like life just kind of comes at them. Yeah. But like the person that is likely to attract luck, that you've got on your bookshelf Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, they're likely to say, hey, did you read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance? What jumped out at you about that book? They learned something about you that then they use to figure out what to sell you, right?
Yes.
And it's like all of a sudden they know something about you and how you tick that they would have never gotten out of a normal customer interview.
Yeah.
And so, like, I noticed that guys like Joe Lemont or some of the good entrepreneurs that I've worked with, they'll be in an office and they'll say, hey, that logo on that coffee cup, what's up with that? Who's that company? I've never heard of that before. Yeah. And they'll say, oh, I'm working with this company. Well, tell me more about it. Why are you working with them? How'd you decide? And they're telling you, as they tell you that story, their entire purchasing process and like their decision-making process and how much money they spent and a lot of things. And so now, was that person lucky? No, I don't think so.
No,
right? Yeah. I think that person extracted more information from the environment than others.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. It's some people just extract and process information on a very different level than others. Yeah. And that's one of those very rare abilities, I don't think.
Yeah, and then there's other people, the corresponding side of it is there's some people who you just know they're going to talk people into stuff. You just know that they can just like somehow. Yeah. And some of them it's because they're like Qasar and they're intense and you're like, that guy's focused, I'd follow him. Yeah. Some people it's more like, oh man, like Justin Kahn wasn't that way. Justin Kahn was like more of a thrill seeker, but he was so crazy that you're like, I want to see what it's like to work with this guy. I wonder what this guy's going to do. Right. And so like some people can be like that and succeed, but they have this quality to them where they attract people almost like a magnet to the thing that they're doing, and they get people to root for their project.
Oh, so they come in different flavors. So it's just, yeah.
Like some people, it's like they want it to be their life's work and it's their mission, Elon. I don't think Justin was that way. I think Justin was more of like a thrill seeker. Like, Justin likes to break the eggs and see if they make an omelet. And if they don't, okay, well, let's break something else, right? And they can all work, but they all have different reasons and different ways of showing up in the world.
Yeah. I want to talk about, since we're talking about your earlier journey and how you made these career decisions, and you got to work with and learn from some legendary entrepreneurs, right? Like Motive is a mafia on its own, is it? Like,
Yeah, they ended up having some good folks, and then I also learned from a lot of the good VCs. And so Jim Breyer had been an investor in Motive. And so when I came out to Silicon Valley, he's one of the first venture capitalists I knew in Silicon Valley,
Right.
which ain't bad. Right?
Yeah,
Not a bad
nope.
start. And, and I also just had extremely good beginner's luck. And so,
Was it luck?
so my first investment ever was Odeo, which didn't work, but then it became Twitter. My second investment was Digg with Kevin Rose, which for a while seemed like it was going to be a great project. And so, I like to say the secret to venture capital is to get lucky in your first 5 years. And because if you do, you get this halo effect and people think you know something and all that. And so I was certainly lucky. I was lucky the first 5 months.
I'll make an effort to break that down since we just went over the concept of luck. How did you meet the founders of Odeo at the time?
I just thought podcasting was cool. And I was, I had an auxiliary input jack in my car, and I was listening to podcasts all the time. And, the software was terrible. You had to use this open source stuff. And then I thought that there were two interesting projects. One was Odeo and the other was Podshow, which was Adam Curry. And I didn't connect with the ideas of Podshow. I didn't think that a DJ was going to build the right company. I thought somebody like Ev, who'd done Blogger, was more likely to get it right.
Right.
Yeah.
So prepared mind.
In the sense.
But it didn't work, right? Like, so a week after I invested, here it is, my first ever angel investment, and Apple decides to give away podcasting on iTunes. And it's like, okay, I looks like we're out of business if we don't come up with something else.
Right.
So, hard to give me much credit in that.
Was microblogging obvious at the time?
Not at all, no. Oh, we were, he tried to figure out what the business should be for a little over a year. And then just out of desperation, right? Like, so Jack was working on this thing, and they were either going to call it TWTTR or Voicemail 2.0. And then some of the investors were actually disenchanted with Odeo.
Right.
So he agreed to give us all our money back, and he got all the rights to all their IP and everything. And, before you knew it, Twitter was becoming a thing. Yeah.
And so did you reinvest into Twitter?
I did, yeah. And so it's interesting, like Twitter is one of those investments where if you invested in Odeo and then didn't invest in Twitter, it kind of mocks you every day, But yeah, I told Ev at the time when he offered me my money back, I said, look, you don't owe me anything, and you win some, you lose some, and I don't have any problem with the fact that you tried and it didn't work out. And he said, yeah, but I just need to give everybody their money back because there's some investors who are leaning on me pretty hard. And it'd just be easier for me and everybody else if you just take it. And I was like, well, as long as you let me invest in your next thing. And so, then Twitter takes off, and I thought it's going to drift away. He's going to forget. And then one day he calls me and says, hey, did you mean it when you said you wanted to invest? Because if you do, now's the time. I'm going to raise money, and if you want in, I'll make some room.
Yeah.
So yeah, very cool.
Not entirely luck there.
Yeah, well, I was pretty lucky. Yeah, but I mean, it was, I think that I was, to the extent that it mattered at all, I think I treated him well in the relationship and cared about what he was doing, and cared about the right things.
So you have to do all the other things right for you, to have luck happen to you, to meet that side door.
Yeah, and so that's right, I think. But and so I just think that like some of this is putting yourself on the right roads to get hit by the lucky truck. Yeah. And what people say is, oh, so then you're just saying it's random. And I'm saying, no, it's not random. I'm saying that chance is part of the daily experience. And some people know how to turn chance into an advantage. And some people expect everything to be deterministic all the time.
What did you know about Ev or learn about Ev from the Odeo journey that you were completely convinced that, whatever he does next, I want to put a check in?
Well, I thought he's very honorable. Giving somebody 100% of their money back in a deal that didn't work out is pretty unique. I thought that he was a product genius. It's hard to describe. He has this ability. Jack has it in a different way, but like Ev has this ability to like name things and like describe things in a way that is just really elegant. And so like, Blogger, I mean, nobody knew what the word blog meant until he popularized it with Blogger software. And then he turns around and does Odeo, and it was a beautiful product. And then Twitter also had a je ne sais quoi to it, and then even Medium, had.
Yeah.
Now by then he was raising tons of money, and I wasn't a fit for Medium. But he was, all of his projects had that quality to them where they were just very high concept.
So he had the ability to also create movements, I guess, from very early days. Blogger is like, an example of that, and he carried that on into every other product. Like, seems like whatever he does next, if he has to create a movement for it, he's the guy.
Yeah, and he's also just really thoughtful. So like I remember I talked to him when I was writing Pattern Breakers, and I told him I was working on this book, and I wanted to check some facts with him and stuff. And he's like, oh, if you're interested in that, you must be interested in creativity and stuff. And I said, oh, yeah, absolutely. And I ran some books by him. And then he ran one by me that I hadn't heard about yet called Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned by this guy named Kenneth Stanley. And so I read that. And so he always has some take on stuff where it's kind of whimsically thoughtful. And so I really appreciate that about him a lot.
Interesting. And so we'll talk about the other one, Digg. Like, how did you meet Kevin Rose, and how did that come about?
Kevin Rose, so, Ron Conway was kind of becoming the human connector of all people.
Right.
And so I'd heard about him, and so I met with him at a bar somewhere in like Palo Alto, I think it was. And I said, Ron, I hear that you invest in a lot of great companies. I'd like to do something with you. I just need one chance. Just give me one chance. That's all I need. And he's like, okay, I guess I'll give you a chance. What does that mean?
Yeah.
And I said, well, there's this company I'm interested in. It's called Digg.
Right.
And I imagine that you're going to see it or about have already. And is there a chance that we could look at it together? And he pulls out his spreadsheet. It's a big spreadsheet full of companies.
Right.
And he notices that Digg's on it.
Yeah.
And at the time, he wasn't yet familiar with what Digg really did that much, right? So he goes, okay, fine, whatever. You can come with me if you want. So I came with him. Well, I went to his house. He had a house in San Francisco at the time. And Kevin Rose and Jay Adelson came, and they showed Digg. And I just had instant ignition on the idea.
How did you spot Digg? Why Digg of all the companies?
Accident. So the new Star Wars movie had just come out, and my son was a huge Star Wars fan. He was 5 years old. And he wanted me to do a movie of him fighting his sister with lightsabers in the backyard. And so I went to Michael's and bought some sticks and created these lightsabers with these wooden sticks, and I wrapped blue tape around one and red tape around the other. And then I went online to figure out how do you rotoscope lightsaber blades onto these wooden sticks. And there was a tutorial on how to do it that came up on this site called Digg. And I was like, I've never seen this before. What's up with this Digg thing? And so I kind of went down this rabbit hole of looking at this site Digg, and I thought, man, this is really interesting because, there was this book that had been written at the time called We the Media, and it talked about citizens journalism, and I was like, this is the best citizens journalism idea I've seen. And why aren't people talking about this? And it turns out people were. And so I was like, man, this is super interesting. I got to meet these guys somehow. But they had no idea who I was, and they had no reason to care about me. I was just some random washed-up enterprise software guy from Austin, Texas, And so, but when I got to meet him with Ron, that gave me a chance, to invest. And so that was, Ron did me a solid there.
What have you learned about relationships from the entire venture journey over the last almost 20 years now? It is so interesting, right? Like, you've taken a company public, and at that point, that's probably considerable. There are probably not as many public company successes. So theoretically, this person should want to work with you, right? Or like seek mentorship, guidance, whatever, or the networks you have. But that's still not how it works.
No.
Well, what is it about that?
Oh, I don't know. I just think that Silicon Valley has a very rapid half-life of who's interesting, right? And so, I talked to these YC founders this week. They don't care that I'm one of the OG seed investors.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean anything to them. 20 years ago, they were in diapers, right? Like,
Right.
It doesn't matter. Like, none of that stuff matters.
Right.
Like, me investing in Odeo and Twitter and Digg, That's ancient history.
There's a recency bias, always.
Yeah, and so you have to stay relevant to what's happening. And it's, the problem that a lot of guys my age get into is they overly lean upon their prior networks. They want Kevin Rose to show them the next deal, or Justin Kahn, and maybe they will, but like, you've got to always be looking for the next new person who's living in the future, and you have to like the process of beginning again, and not expecting them to be impressed by anything you've done. Because if you expect the people who are impressed to do stuff, you're going to get adverse selection, and the best founders are living in the world of tomorrow, and they've got stuff to do.
Yeah.
And they need to know, should they work with you or not, and what do you bring? What have you done for me lately? And that's as it should be.
So how do you keep up? What's your process?
Yeah, I think I just still like the job, and I try to keep liking the job and work hard, and I don't think there's a lot of magic to it,
Is there a recent story of similar to how you had to meet Kevin Rose through Ron Conway, you had to meet a newer founder who didn't care you're an OG seed investor, where you had to meet through someone?
Oh, that's a good question. Oh, there has to have been. There's just so many. There's so many who haven't responded to my email that I've come back to that it's hard for me to say. And part of what's challenging is we don't know yet some of these people whether they're going to be big or not. I could say their names and it wouldn't mean anything people yet.
Fair.
But yeah, I'd say this is a business where the calls you make matter a lot more than the calls you take. And it's you have to sort of have this attitude that I have to earn their attention. I have to earn their trust. I have to earn their preference. And if you're not willing to do that, you need to retire. Because as soon as you start to think that something is owed to you anyway because of your reputation or what's happened or anything else, you're not going to be very good. And it doesn't take long to be not very good at all.
I had Aaron Hoffman on the podcast, and he had an interesting way to phrase the venture capitalist job. He had this blog on insiders versus outsiders, and he talks about zero versus Noah. You might have read that. So where he talks about some jobs are network jobs, right, and some jobs are where you have a specialist skill that you contribute to the world. And in the 80s, investment banking was the network job, and now being a venture capitalist is that network job. So in many ways, venture capital is still that network job because you rely on people to get to these opportunities. And was that the right phrasing? Would you agree with that?
Well, I think it's a good mental model. I think that the thing about all mental models is they're useful in some contexts and they're not in others, right? So a flat map will tell us how to get from here to Cupertino with perfect accuracy. But it won't tell us how to get to Germany with perfect accuracy because the globe, right, isn't flat.
Right.
And so the thing I like to say with any mental model is under what conditions is it a good mental model and under what conditions is it not? Because that's really how to think about it, because there's no one way to describe all of reality in one way, right? There's just ways to compress the complexity of reality in a way that helps you decide better, right? And so the thing that I've always thought about is I believe that everybody in the world is its unique node in this network, if we talk about networking. Because of that, everybody has a comparative advantage. Like your DNA is different from mine, and your DNA is different from anybody in all of human history so far. And so what that means is that the constellation of your passions, your advantages, your disadvantages, your reputation, all those things is unique, truly unique, and can't be replicated by anybody else. So what I say to people is, what we need to do is figure out how to be your own personal monopoly best self, and that's the real task.
Yeah.
And so like for example, I'm never going to be as good at macroeconomics as Peter Thiel. And I'm never going to be as good at big data and data type of businesses as Aaron Hoffman. And I'm never going to be as good of a networker as Aaron is. But where I can really be good, I'm dangerous in, if you said, okay, I'm going to give you and all the other seed investors, I'm going to put you all in separate rooms, and I'm going to give you a quiz on seed investing and all the finer points and all the mental models and all the rabbit holes to be considered, I will smoke people in that game, right? And so like if the founder values kind of the fact that I'm sort of a 0 to 1 philosopher king type of looking for the person that's different, not better, there's a certain set of traits, right, that make me hard to compete with. But I don't try to compete with Peter Thiel his way, right? Or Oren his way, or Gary Tan and YC their way, right? Like they have their way of doing things. And so what's interesting is, what I say to most people is, the challenge is to find your unique set of comparative advantages. It's to niche down and find your personal monopoly. Because if you find your personal monopoly and you find it in such a way that it's valuable and rare, you're impossible to compete with.
You go all in on it.
Yeah, and you can't. Nobody can compete with you.
Right.
And so, like, you know, when Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, everybody talks about competitive advantage, but I actually think that's the wrong framing. Competitive advantage kind of assumes there's a market and you're competing for share in that market, and you want to hustle and outcompete the other guy. Comparative advantage says everybody can at the same time have comparative advantages, and that what you want to do is build a business around your comparative advantage in a monopolistic way. And so, like, I'll give you an example. Let's say you're better at programming than I am, and you're better at doing the dishes than I am. If we're roommates, you might decide, I'm willing to pay Maples to do the dishes, even though I'm better at it, because I can get paid more to do computer programming.
Right.
When we had David Sachs on, he mentioned that it's a feature of Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Yeah,
For sure.
In many ways, because that's how you make a lot of money too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's arguably the only way.
Yeah.
And it's really the only way you make money, period. And so, you know, it's kind of like index funds. If you want to do how everybody else does, you buy the index. And you won't outperform, but if the market does well, you'll do well.
Yeah.
And you certainly won't do worse than the market.
Yeah.
But every time you decide to pick a stock, you're making an explicit choice to either outperform or underperform the market. So like if I buy, let's say I buy NVIDIA stock. NVIDIA may be a great company, may be the best company, but that's already priced in. Who doesn't know that NVIDIA is a great company? So the question is NVIDIA relatively fairly priced compared to the index? And if you believe it's underpriced compared to the index, you should be a buyer. If it's overpriced, you should be a seller. But here's the thing. If you buy NVIDIA thinking it's going to go up and it goes down, you'll underperform the index.
Right.
And if you buy NVIDIA and it goes up past the index, you'll outperform the index. So like every time you choose to be non-consensus, there's the wisdom of the crowds betting against you in equilibrium that you're wrong. And so in order to outperform, you have to risk underperforming. You have to, right? There's no free lunch.
Right.
And so that's the thing about being non-consensus and right, is you have to be correspondingly willing to be wrong and embarrassed. And if you're not willing to do that, you'll never be great. You'll always have returns that regress to the mean, right? You'll always have returns that are just like the index.
Well, as you're talking about being a non-consensus investor, we, I think, went through at the beginning. There's this tweet that went viral last night. Martin Qasar from A16Z posted, the idea that non-consensus investing is where the alpha is actually quite dangerous in the early stage. Follow-on capital tends to be more and more consensus aligned.
So first of all,
break that down.
Yeah. I have a lot of respect for Martin, and you know, I have a lot of time for that guy, especially since he was an entrepreneur who started a company that had a greater than $1 billion exit with Nasira, right? So like that guy knows what he's doing. My point of departure on this question might be slightly different. And so for me, it's not like I'm an investor and I'm looking at a bunch of ideas and some are consensus and some aren't. Like I'm spending time with somebody like Qasar, or I'm spending time with somebody like Omar, and I'm watching them go through the idea maze.
Yeah.
And they themselves are saying, if my idea is not novel, it's not worth pursuing. And so, like, does that mean I'm being a non-consensus better or not? Not really. I mean, we're still talking about what's it going to take to get this thing funded and what are we going to have to accomplish, what are the risks and all that stuff. But for me, the purpose of a seed round is to convert the non-consensus risky aspect of the idea into a provable risk worth taking. So I'm like, okay, every startup has a bunch of risks that you need to take out. When I do a seed round, I like to say, let's find the most important non-consensus risk of all of them that we can possibly take out as soon as we can. If we take that out, then I think Martine would agree with this. We've done the single most important thing we can to de-risk the idea. Right. And we've done the single most important thing to create immediate upside asymmetric value for the idea.
Right.
And so, but like I'm not preoccupied with success or failure in that circumstance. I'm saying our insight is an underpriced high upside future.
Right.
And we need to figure out if it's risky and wrong or if it's risky and right. But I don't look at risk as the probability of failure. I look at it as the expected value of the upside, given what happens if we're right.
That's a very, very good framing. So when you talk about this underpriced sort of insight, if you relate this to the NVIDIA example you gave, in that aspect, is a seed fund sort of positioning itself for when the company is overpriced for that bubble? Is this like, did you invest in, the best AI companies 5 years before, it became a super cycle?
Well, we've been pretty lucky so far on AI, right? So, Anne invested in SmarterDX 2 years ago and it just exited for $1 billion and she did really well on that one and stuff.
Yeah.
We haven't made a lot of AI investments because the problem is...
I just gave that as an example.
Yeah, but like, here's the thing, right? Your circle of competence is not just what projects excite you, but it's like, do you make money? So the most I've ever paid for seed round and not regretted it was $45 million post money, and that was applied intuition. And so people say to me all the time inside Floodgate, well, you gave Qasar a term sheet at 45 post.
Yeah.
What about this guy or what about this company? I'm like, is the person as good as Qasar? I'm willing to have that discussion, right? But like, what are we really talking about here, right? And so like, one of the things that I think about with circle of competence is it's an existence proof. So I have a list of every investment I've ever made in 20 years that's made me more than 20x my money. And I'm like, are there any patterns? Are there any patterns in price, ownership, stage, sector, founder type? Turns out there have to be.
Yeah.
But like, I'm like, okay, now I'm looking at this project over here and it has a set of traits. It's more expensive or it's different from any project I've ever invested in 20 years and ever made money doing. Okay, that's fine, but like, it feels like I'm drifting out of my circle of competence. Do I really want to do that? So then back to your question, the reason I haven't done a lot of AI investments is they're raising their seed round at 100 post. And I'm like, okay, well, under what conditions could I make 100 times my money? Not very many.
Yeah.
Now, you might have, right? If you'd done the original round of OpenAI, you might have.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I think you won't.
Yeah.
So that's why we haven't. Following your circle of competence is a natural rate limiter. Because if everything around you is overpriced, nothing meets your criteria.
Yeah.
So you don't do many.
Yeah.
If everybody's afraid, like in 2009, and everybody's in the fetal position, a whole bunch of deals meet your criteria. But that's good because you're investing when everything's underpriced.
Right.
And so investing in your circle of competence has a way of keeping you implicitly out of overheated markets and implicitly unafraid in underheated markets.
So in these different super cycles, you're investing in all the outliers in every other sector which people might miss.
Well, it's more like Buffett said it well, like investing is like a business where you're a batter and the pitches come in and there's no called strikes. So if you want, you don't have to ever swing.
Right.
You know, in baseball, you don't swing at a good pitch, they call a strike.
Right.
In venture or all investing, what you want to do is know when it's worth taking a swing, right? And so what you want is for everybody in the audience to be saying, swing, you bum, you haven't swung in a long time, why aren't you swinging? You're out of touch, you're a relic, you don't know what you're doing. And then your pitch comes in and you just swing with all of your might.
Right.
And hopefully you crush a few, right? But like, to me, that's how and it requires a lot of discipline to turn off the noise and hype, like we're naturally mimetic in our brains, right? But fortunately, you know, like in 2021, I only made one investment, and it was Hadrian. And so, like, you know,
And that's turned out
so far so good,
Yeah.
right? But it met my criteria.
Right.
But it was like I couldn't find anything
Yeah.
else. And my only regret was I didn't get to invest more in Hadrian early. But like, so, you know, I find that it's really good to know what do you find, just like you want a startup to know what an attractive customer is, I need to know what an attractive Mike Maples investment is. And I need to be less focused on what everybody else is saying around me and more focused on the truth-seeking aspects of, am I making sense, right? Like, am I caring about the things I should care about?
And am I spending time with the founders that care about the same things?
Correct.
So it's like a self-selection process. I think, as you talked about earlier, you know, every person has a unique DNA. So you're uniquely going to get along with, you know, the people you're going to get along with, and that is your comparative advantage.
Right.
But as soon as
my other comparative advantage, and this is subtle, is I can say to somebody like Qasar, we've hung out for 14 months, so I want to work together. If you want to work together, my guess is you're going to have a higher valuation than I want, and I'm going to want a lower valuation than you want.
Yeah.
But like, let's just figure it out.
Yeah.
Life is too short. Let's get on with life.
Yeah.
And so you're in a much better position to do that than if he's pitched you for the first time and you're trying to put the Shazam on him and say what your unique value add is and all that stuff. Because, you know, it's all such hot air. It all sounds so hollow. All the VCs sound the same. And so the fact that you spent 14 months in the first place says something, right? Like, it's like you can't fake that.
Yeah.
And so, like, you know, that was one of the things I started to learn about myself, was that plus, and then the things that led to me writing the book, I was like, I can help the founder stress test their ideas, and I can talk to them before they have a pitch, and I don't have to be a buy low, sell high kind of guy. I can just say, hey, you know, you seem to have insanely high potential. You want to change the future. How can I help you think about this? Yeah.
So,
well, why did you write the book?
Well, yeah. So Peter Ziebelman at Stanford convinced me to. So I was wondering why so many of our successes had come from pivots, and you know, I thought I needed to figure that out, or I just needed to retire before I got exposed. And so I started looking at some of this, and I started to realize that there was a lot of randomness, but it wasn't all an accident. And so I started to try to understand, what is it about these startups that have these radical breakthroughs that was different about them, and you know, what could be learned, and how could that set of factors be used by a founder to stress test their idea, decide what's worth pursuing and what they should avoid.
Has that also become a great, like, filtration process since you published the book last year?
Well, you know, it's funny. I was using it more to filter before the book came out, because at the time nobody knew about the book, and so it was easier for me to use the criteria in the book.
Right.
Now people can read the book and try to fool me.
It's easier to,
It's easier to fool me. Yeah.
There's always that. It's always a double-edged sword once you, like, publish a playbook.
Yeah. But what people don't really realize is that my secret isn't really whether I know those frameworks better. My secret is just my willingness to engage founders in a different way. Yeah. And that's something that you could say this week you want to do, but like it takes many, many years to do that, and to, like, you know, you think about the amount of commitment it takes to have a strategy of people first, like for real. You know, it takes years and like thousands of reps to get that right. And that's assuming that you're starting where I started. And you know, when I started doing it that way, I'd already helped define the category, and I'd like seen a bunch of, I had a lot of reps in terms of knowing what a good deal was and what a not good deal was. So it's hard to, I like strategies where sort of like patience is a form of arbitrage, and where, it's like in order to copy our strategy, you'd have to commit yourself to it for 10 years. This is what I really like about Mike Spicer at Sutter Hill, right? Like, exactly what he's going to do.
Right.
Like I can tell you his exact playbook. I could probably write it down as well as he can.
One company for the next 30 years.
It's more just like let's take pure storage. He's like, okay, flash is going to be a thing in the enterprise. I'm going to go find the best flash storage. I'm going to find the best storage architect in the world. I'm going to ask him, can you do a scalable flash thing for the enterprise? I'm going to tell him that I can be the temporary CEO. We'll recruit one. I'll handle all fundraising. Can you build the thing? He does. Does the same thing with Snowflake. Finds the guys at Oracle to do cloud data warehouse. The insight, what Spicer's doing is not compelling because nobody knows what he's doing. It's compelling because he consistently does it year in and year out for 15 years. And so, like, if you want to do that, okay, great. If you're ready to make a 15-year commitment, that's fine. Yeah. But if you just read that Mike Spicer's in the Forbes Mice list this year and he did it this way, and you just do that until you do the next thing, you're not going to win.
That fair. Well, since we've talked about Sutter Hill Ventures and you've talked about, your comparative advantages, you're 20 years into this thing, and the venture space is just generally, I think, changing at a fast pace. What is a lot of funds that raised from 2021 are not around, 2025, and a lot of funds that probably raised with the defense thesis or AI thesis, in this super cycle might not be around. What does the future of venture capital look like in the next maybe 5 years?
I don't have any idea.
I think last year or a couple of years ago, you did this podcast where you did talk about how smaller funds might be, more popular, and those fund managers might have a comparative advantage. But how's your thinking evolved on that, at least?
Yeah, so I have a couple of thoughts, but I do resist a little bit of trying to get too macro about it, because I think that in many ways startups are all about exceptionalism, and it's exceptional companies, and then there's the exception of the investors who find those companies, and so like there's a lot more of that than I think people realize. Let on. People tend to want to treat it like an asset class, and I don't tend to like that way of thinking. Yeah. What I would say is that the modern multi-stage fund is starting to become kind of clear, right? You got A16Z, you got Sequoia, you've got Greylock, you've got Excel, Lightspeed. I'd say that's one group of funds, and they're in every geography, every stage, every sector. Yeah. And if you're going to play that game, you got to have a little bit of a mindset of tackle everybody and see who has the ball, right? Like, because you're like, I got to be in every great deal at one time or another. And that's going to work for some of them, and it's not going to work for some of them. But like, if I had to say what's happening in the industry, clearly that's a thing that's happening. I think most people know that. I think what fewer people have noticed is like what's happening in modern seed. So I think that like in the early days, the trick was to just define the category in the first place, right? Nobody thought it was going to be a thing. Now I think the trick is to separate yourself from the other players in the category by emphasizing your comparative advantages. So I think ours are, we only do seed, like for real. That's all we do. Yeah. And because of that, all of our mental models and frameworks of what makes a good investment are going to be very focused, right? The other thing is we have a little bit more exit latitude. So we can, if a company is raising money at a $20 billion valuation, the multi-stage guys have to double down because they have to get an exit that is going to return billions and billions of dollars of exit profit. Whereas, several of those can 2x or 3x our fund, at that window of time. Right. And so people talk about seed investing as if it's hyper competitive, and it is in the entry. But the good seed funds realize that there's exit arbitrage.
Right.
And
yeah.
so we've made pretty good use of that.
Yeah.
We've also set it up so that our follow-on investing is done by a different partner than the first check investors.
Which is very unique.
Yeah, I think we're the only ones I'm aware of that do that. And I would bet that our follow-on returns are higher than most firms, maybe by a wide margin. And the reason is that Iris Choi is like, I'm going to be accountable. People are going to look at the basket of follow-on deals that I wrote checks for, and they're going to ask, how does that return profile compare with the rest of Floodgate? And if it's not good, we shouldn't even be doing follow-ons. And so, you have to play competitive offense with your money wherever you can. And so we realize that you got to be careful with follow-ons, but also pro rata rights are a right.
Right.
And so, Iris bought super pro rata in the Series B of Applied Intuition because she had conviction, right? About Qasar. So there's that. So most of the seed funds have not yet modernized. Most of the seed funds are people doing small checks for cool things that they like.
Right.
But they haven't thought about portfolio construction or
follow-ons,
or exits or any of that stuff.
I think it's Peter Thiel that said that follow-on shouldn't be an automatic yes.
Oh, heck no.
And you should almost reevaluate the company from fresh lens.
Yes.
And which makes a lot of sense, but it's rare that anyone's done it.
I think most LPs, if they separated out the returns that the firms that they've invested in on follow-ons, if they looked at those returns, there'd be riots. There'd be pitchforks in the street. They'd be like, what the hell are you thinking?
Well, I hope you write a blog about it someday with those insights. That'd be fun.
Yeah. I try really hard not to talk about how other people do their jobs. It's hard enough for us to do a good job.
Were you never tempted to do a bigger fund?
Never once.
Never?
No.
Why not?
I just didn't think it would be as fun to do. I didn't think I would be as good at it. I didn't think it was in my circle of competence. It never even occurred to me a single time.
Or even to structure a fund in a way where the follow-on fund is like a separate fund, or there's like strategic capital.
That tempted us. For a while, there were all these opportunity funds and follow-on stuff, and people say, "Hey, you're in this cool company. Don't you want to own more of it?" But we started to realize that Floodgate itself is an opportunity fund, and it's like $1's a dollar.
Right.
Like what you realize is that $1 to an LP is $1.
Right.
And you've got a fund, and you need to make the most money you can with the dollars they gave you.
Yeah.
And it's hard, but it's not complicated.
So within the 100 million you decide what's the follow-on capital. Like that is the strategy, basically.
Pretty much.
Right.
And we can flex the follow-on versus the upfront, but it's
all the same dollar.
It's based upon how do we play offense with our money,
right?
And have our money be competitively advantaged.
And with a few personal questions, we talked about I think encouraging more kids, more people, early on in their careers. Is there a favorite story of encouragement from growing up, something your family did? I know you talk about your dad a lot.
Yeah. Well, my mom one time, I got interested in Old English calligraphy, and she bought me some ink pens. And then one time she introduced me to this guy named Ken Brown who'd written a book on calligraphy. And then I met him, and he gave me a kit, and I started practicing a lot and had a knack for it. And then I started writing him letters, and he put my letters in his book and stuff. And so, but my mom was very, whenever I would have an interest in anything, she would go unbelievably all in to make sure. If I was interested in dinosaurs, she would take me to the Museum of Natural History to see the biggest T-Rex in the United States, right? Because I thought T-Rexes were cool.
Right.
So they were really good. Both of my parents were really good about it.
Fueling your interest.
Yeah, and if I took any independent initiative about anything, they were just completely excited, very unbelievably supportive. I think in hindsight, it sort of made me realize that you can just kind of decide what you want to do and what you're interested in, and you don't have to have other people decide it for you. And so I think that was good. And then the other thing is, I remember when I was a kid, I started learning how to program a computer. I was writing some video games, and I said to my dad, maybe if I succeed at this, I could sell the company to Disney. and he says, that's the wrong attitude. You should buy Disney someday. And so that was the other thing that they taught me was that, kind of high standards and expectations are the key to everything.
This increase the scale of your ambition.
Yeah,
in a way.
it's just as easy to succeed being really ambitious as not so ambitious.
Yeah.
Well, are there similar stories of encouragement from company building, founding days, or when you were starting out in venture capital?
By the time I was getting into venture capital, people kind of weren't as encouraging. There were people who were really helpful, right? Like Bruce Dunleavy at Benchmark introduced me to Phil Horsley at Horsley Bridge. Catherine Gould helped me figure out how to do Fund One.
What is a book that you recently read that has changed your thinking on something?
There's one that I kind of reread, The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. I just always come back to that one as really good.
What was your highlight?
That a lot of people think about genes as something that support humans, right? And like Dawkins's point of view is that the genes want to self-propagate, and the human is a vehicle, or the animal is a vehicle for the gene to continue expressing itself forward. And so that means that, natural selection doesn't mean that it selects for the best in an ideal sense in the creature. It selects for the thing that's going to allow the genes to propagate most likely. And so what does that mean? So like your humans have to be rational. Like you could say humans reason to the extent that it allows them to reproduce. And so that genes are going to be oriented and optimized to having people think in ways that contribute to their reproduction as a species. And so when you realize that that is the case, it changes your reality about evolution and how DNA works and how competition works and how specialization works. And so I thought that was an interesting book. And then that book also coined the term meme. And so, part of why I read it again was that I'm interested in how people are using memes. There's this guy, Jason Levin, who wrote that book, Memes Make Millions.
Right.
I thought that was interesting, so I'll go back to the source.
And Nadia Aspara, who wrote Anti-Memetics.
Yeah, I haven't read that one. I read Learning in Public. I think she's a great writer, really smart. I should read Anti.
I started reading it. Great book.
Yeah. So but I think that the selfish gene is kind of mandatory.
What did that change your thinking on?
Most of it had to do with people tend to think about survival of the fittest as this hyper competition between things, and that there's this efficient competition that emerges. But when you start to say, okay, well, genes exist solely to propagate, it's like, that's interesting. So like, for example, it will cause you to say, now I know why some institutions are so broken. Because the institution exists to be self-perpetuating more than it exists to fulfill the original mission of the institution. So, Balaji Srinivasan often talks about institutions that are inherited and not founded. This happens a lot where the institution starts out meeting the conditions of its mission, but its legacy logic starts to supersede its founding logic. And now it's more in existence to perpetuate itself and advance itself than it is to fulfill the mission.
And it happens to any company, anything that becomes an institution over time.
Yes. And it happens in computer waves too, right? So the microprocessor allowed mass abundance of compute, but eventually Microsoft got to a point where they're trying to get you to upgrade Word every year, even though you don't want the new toolbar. So the early days of the PC, every new version of Word was freaking awesome and everybody wanted it. Everybody just wanted software at all.
Yeah.
But pretty soon, I like to say that any frame, any revolution, any institution has an abundance logic and a legacy logic. And at first, the abundance logic is so powerful that everybody overlooks the legacy logic. But like now we could take the internet. People complain about Facebook is putting stuff in the feed to capture your attention rather than to be real, or rather than bring people closer, or rather than to be good. And so everything has a legacy logic where the institutional imperative to propagate what makes the institution succeed supersedes everything else. And people can say Bill Gates was a bad guy, Zuck's a bad guy. I say it's inevitable. Like
it is inevitable.
Yeah, when you read The Selfish Gene, you're like, this is inevitable, right? Like this is like, this just happens. This is as natural as like sex is, right? It's just like the natural law of how things self-organize in a world of limited resources. And so, but the beauty of the computer industry is, as soon as that happens, then the AI wave comes in, and the internet subverted the legacy logic of the PC, because now you could upgrade software anywhere, and like all the things that were wrong about software in the era of the PC got fixed. And so that's kind of what I find is that, that's why you need punctuated equilibrium, right? In genetics, every now and then you need a mutation.
Correct.
So mutation is a feature, not a bug. Because without that, then the selfish gene will start to
self-propagate.
It'll self-propagate in ways that become more self-preserving rather than abundance creating.
This is great food for thought. And
it's interesting. Yeah, it's a good book.
It's interesting. And maybe that's why, venture capitalists will still have a job.
Maybe, yeah.
Right. Yeah. And well, and on that note, Mike,
cool.
It was a pleasure having you on.
Thanks for having me. Fist bump.
Fist bump.
Thanks.
Same for doing this.
Oh, yeah, you bet.